Welcome everyone to ADA Compliance and Website Accessibility from SilverTech. We're a digital agency working to redefine how businesses engage with and understand their customers. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to get the most out of today's webinar, here are a few tips. The initial presentation will last about 30 minutes. There'll be a Q&A to follow, and we've scheduled an additional 30 minutes for this portion. Please post any questions you may have in the webinar chat pane. The slides, recording, and tools will be made available after the broadcast. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. I am your host, Ian Hughes, content strategist here at SilverTech. I write for SilverTech's blog, podcast, and our webinars. And I'm pleased today to introduce SilverTech's ADA experts. They both bring a unique perspective to the issue of website accessibility. First, let me introduce Paul Creme, our Vice President and General Counsel. With over 30 years of experience practicing law, Paul works with our senior leadership to ensure that SilverTech is consistently pursuing strategic goals as well as providing day-to-day contract review. Welcome, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon.
Also joining us today is Eddy, our Engineering and UX Manager. Andrew's extensive background allows him to ensure that all of SilverTech's designs are cutting edge and pushing industry norms in order to deliver the most innovative user experience for our clients. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be here.
On the agenda today, we are going to go into a brief history of the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, the ADA website accessibility and lessons from recent cases. Then we'll discuss the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. And then we'll open it up, as we said, for a Q&A. Again, if you have questions along the way, just please post them in the webinar chat pane. So, we're going to talk today about the ADA and website accessibility, but first, let's begin with an introduction to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Signed into law in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act gives civil rights protections to individuals with disabilities similar to those provided to individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, age, and religion. Importantly, it's a civil rights law. It guarantees equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, employment, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. Paul, essentially the purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. Is this correct?
Yes, it is. And I guess in terms of a company's website, I think you need to think of it as the front door to your business. So in other words, you need to provide the same accessibility to people who have disabilities to enter into your website just as you would enter into your business through the front door.
That's a very good analogy. Well put. In 2018, it's expected that the Department of Justice will issue regulations regarding website accessibility, but more on that in a little later. To add further clarity, the U.S. Attorney General signed the ADA Amendments Act final rule with an effective date of last October 2016. In summary, the ADA Amendment Act is intended to broaden the definition of disability. Paul, what does it mean for ADA cases that the question of whether an individual's impairment is a disability under the ADA should not demand extensive analysis?
Well, basically the amendments were to address the fact that over time the courts have narrowed the definition of people with a disability.
Sure.
So the attempt was to expand the meaning again and to reduce the burden that the person would have to carry to prove that they have a disability pursuant to the law.
And now this has been expanded, the meaning of physical and mental impairments. The term is now illustrated with the additional examples of dyslexia and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
That's correct.
So the key takeaway from this section is the person making a claim may not have to carry as heavy a burden to prove their claim. So who does the ADA apply to? In short, businesses covered by the ADA are Title I. This referred to equal employment opportunity for individuals with disabilities, and that's private employers with 15 or more employees. Title II covered non-discrimination on the basis of disability in state and local government services. That's public entities at state and local levels, which includes both physical and programmatic access to all programs and services offered. Title III, non-discrimination on the basis of disability by public accommodations and in commercial facilities. These are businesses operating for the benefit of the public and nonprofits. In regards to website accessibility, the Department of Justice had promised guidelines in 2016, but focused first on the entities covered under Title II, public entities at state and local levels. So on to the ADA, website accessibility, and we'll take a look at some recent cases to see what lessons we can learn. Here's excerpts from a statement from the U.S. Department of Justice. This is from fall 2015. The ADA's expansive non-discrimination mandate reaches the goods and services provided by public accommodations using internet websites. The inability to access websites puts individuals at a great disadvantage in today's society, which is driven by a dynamic, electronic marketplace and unprecedented access to information. Paul, I think this is the telling part of the statement. Beyond goods and services, information available on the internet has become a gateway to education, socializing, and entertainment. Thoughts there?
Well, I think everybody needs to think of it this way. When you walk into the bank,
Yep.
or if in fact you have a disability and you need to have access to the bank, they have a ramp. They have all sorts of things at the ATM machines to allow you to use their goods and services. Same with an educational institution or any other kind of business.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, when you're thinking of your website, you need to think of it exactly the same way. That people need to have exactly the same rights of access that people who do not have disabilities have. So in other words, your website has to accommodate sight disability, hearing disabilities, any other disabilities that may limit somebody's ability to utilize the services that are provided through your website.
Mm-hmm. I can see, how that would apply to, the banking transactions that I can process in branch. For somebody with a disability has to have the same rights to process those transactions if they are offered in your online banking with some assistance.
Exactly. And again, I think any business would want to have the maximum amount of accessibility anyway. In other words, wouldn't you want to have more people who have the ability to transact business through your website? And again, more and more companies and more institutions and learning institutions, universities, colleges, banking institutions, healthcare institutions are attempting to push a lot of things through their website to save money.
You're right.
In other words, the phone doesn't have to ring and people don't have to call on the phone. If they can access goods and services and provide transactional ability through a website, that actually makes it easier for the business
Absolutely.
as well in the long run.
Briefly, I'd like to touch on Section 508 amendment to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So Section 508 was enacted to eliminate barriers in information technology, to make available new opportunities for people with disabilities, and to encourage development of technologies that will help achieve these goals. Now, there's nothing in Section 508 that requires private websites to comply unless they are receiving federal funds or under contract with a federal agency, but it does point us toward what may be commercial best practices, and those include voluntary standards and guidelines such as the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI. So guidance is due in 2018 for private websites covered under Title III. In the meantime, Paul, we're seeing website ADA compliance is being enforced on a case-by-case basis. Tell us what you're hearing from some of our clients out there.
Well, we're hearing from some clients, and especially in certain geographic parts of the country, that there are law firms or agencies that are targeting specific banking institutions, credit unions, other kinds of businesses that transact through the website, and they're getting demand letters from specific law firms indicating that their website has failed certain requirements and that they need to remedy them or settle. And the problem is absent a specific federal guideline, each individual institution is then subject to making its own determination.
Oh, really?
And the problem there is the cases that have been decided recently have made it a lot easier to get past the first barrier in a litigation. And without getting into it in too much detail, basically when you get sued, if you can file a motion to dismiss, that takes care of the case in a procedural way. You're not reaching the merits.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can provide for a summary judgment, which again is a procedural remedy that takes care of the case relatively quickly. The courts have actually allowed the plaintiffs in these cases to survive both the motion to dismiss and summary judgment. So in other words, now they're going to hear merits, and anytime you start hearing merits in a case, that increases your expense. And again, then it's subject to someone deciding whether in fact you are compliant or not compliant.
Yeah.
So that is the problem at the moment, and a lot of institutions are now forced to make a decision: do I give these people some money right away, or do I try to get ahead of it and remediate my site before I get this particular letter?
Excellent, well put. I think leads us nicely into our next key takeaway, and this was from your blog post a little while back, Paul, that it's a certainty that at some point you may want to make your website ADA compliant.
Well, that's true. And again, If in fact you're in the process of remediating your website and you happen to get a demand letter, you will now have an immediate defense.
Right.
You can go into a court and you can say, we've already addressed it.
Yep.
Or we're in the process of addressing it. That would make it less likely that you're going to remain a target, because now there's not a quick and easy settlement for the plaintiff's law firm.
And speaking of a different target, let's discuss the National Federation of the Blind versus Target Corporation. So we have 3 cases here that highlight a different aspect of accessibility. And we're not going to go into great detail, but I wanted to share what the findings were. Target argued that the website was not a place of public accommodation. However, the court found it is clear that the purpose of the statute is broader than mere physical access, seeking to bar actions or omissions which impair a disabled person's full enjoyment of services or goods of a covered accommodation. So, Paul, I think the key takeaway here is that a website may indeed be considered a place of public accommodation.
Again, I think it goes back to what we said a couple of times now, which is think of it as a front door to your business.
Yeah.
That if everybody can't enter the front door in an equal way, then you have a problem.
Thinking of a business that doesn't necessarily have a front door. So this is the National Association of the Deaf versus Netflix. Now, you might be thinking that ADA wouldn't apply in the same way to Netflix, as they don't have that physical location. But Netflix's Watched Instantly website was deemed to be a public accommodation subject to the ADA, even though there was no physical place of public accommodation. So the ADA covers the services of a public accommodation, not services at or in a public accommodation. The last one we'll take a quick look at is the Department of Justice versus Peapod.com. So this settlement shows that the Department of Justice is looking closely at the accessibility of websites and mobile apps and remains aggressive in its enforcement efforts. And at a minimum, the Department of Justice may require companies to comply with WCAG 2.0 Level AA standards. Andrew, thoughts on mobile applications falling under the ADA? Are Level AA standards difficult to maintain there?
So there's a couple definitions of kind of a mobile application, if you will. There's the actual native applications that you would go in and download from a particular app store. But if you think about how often you actually go into, maybe a Netflix or Chrome or, different apps that you might use on your phone, maybe Amazon. Also think about how many times you access your phone to look at information that doesn't come from a native app. So now you're looking at things like, essentially not really apps per se, but things that are designed or presented on the internet that are designed to display on a smaller device size. So that's everything from responsive web design to mobile applications that can be accessed through a web browser on a mobile device. So the same rules apply to a website that would apply to something being accessed within a window on your mobile device as well. And then Netflix is a perfect example of being able to use a native application on your phone as well. So the difference on some of these is a native application, it's up to the developer and the people that are developing the native application for the phone itself to provide accessibility to the services that they're offering.
Yep.
When you're accessing things through a website, or even some apps will actually trick you and access websites when it looks like a native application. So in those cases, it's really up to following the standard, WCAG, W3C 508, and different compliance sections that apply directly to the web.
Excellent, thank you. Key takeaway then. These recent cases may only be the explosion of website accessibility cases. Paul, you've mentioned in your blog that some courts may be increasingly reluctant to dismiss website accessibility lawsuits at the beginning of the case. Cases will continue to discovery. You touched on this, but really what does this mean?
Well, I think the big thing means it becomes more expensive to defend. And again, I think the prudent thing to do would be to spend the money remediating your site rather than spending the money defending the fact that your site may not be compliant when then you're going to have to remediate it anyway.
Yep.
So I think the best practice would be to decide that you want to be accessible, and there's various tools out there that Andrew could probably talk about that would allow you to survey your own site or have someone survey it for you, find out what's not compliant, and then make decisions about your site. And for instance, maybe there's pages that are never visited, so that may in fact reduce the cost of remediating your site.
Sure, yeah.
Other practices that you engage in that you might need to take a look at is a normal practice that you may decide may not make sense going forward. But in any event, I think a self-evaluation earlier rather than when the letter comes in the mail
Right.
and tells you you're not compliant is the best practice.
So let's now move on to the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, as this is where I think we'll gain an understanding onto what the ultimate guidance will be. Leading the web to its full potential. So the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, was founded in 1994 by Tim Berners-Lee, often credited as one of the founders of the World Wide Web. Andrew, your thoughts? Since the beginning of the internet, it's been about granting inclusive access to information to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I mean, in its, kind of in the inception of the internet, it was intended as a decentralized structure to disseminate information,
Right.
Digitally. So obviously we use the internet every day, especially with people on the webinar and people at the SilverTech office. The internet's a massive part of our life, and it is intended to be able to provide as many people with access to the information or content that you're trying to provide. So not only is the internet, or was the internet, about providing information to as many people as possible, I think it's actually morphed even more so since then. It really is our delivery mechanism for customers to have a kind of relationship with a business or with certain properties on the internet to provide goods, services, and information. More so than, I'll use Paul's example earlier of walking into a storefront or walking into a building. With the millennial generation, kind of taking over the internet, if you will. There is an even harder push right now to be able to be inclusive to as many people as possible.
Excellent. So then in 1999, the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, and the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, created the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. In 2008, these standards were updated in the WCAG 2.0, which has become an ISO international standard for the web. So a number of governments already require that public websites meet these standards, including those in the EU and Australia. And I think, as we saw with the Peapod case, the Department of Justice may take WCAG level AA compliance to be the new standard. WCAG 2.0, it establishes 4 principles, POUR, P-O-U-R, for which there are 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. So let's review the principles first. Perceivable. Information and user interface components must be presentable to users in a way that they can perceive. Provide text alternatives for non-text content, provide captions and other alternatives for multimedia, create content that can be presented in different ways, including by assistive technologies without losing meaning, and make it easier for users to see and hear content. The next principle is operable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. So you must make all functionality available from a keyboard, give users enough time to read and use content, and do not use content that causes seizures. Help users navigate and find content. Andrew, how difficult is it to build a website and plan for example, making all functionality available from your keyboard?
Yep. So to directly answer the question, and I'll kind of circle back on this a little bit, but to make a website keyboard operable is actually pretty basic. So you could simply go to just about any website, open up your favorite web browser, and hit tab, anywhere from 50 to 1,000 times to get to every single element on that page. But you also have to keep in mind that just by default out of the box, hitting tab starting in the upper left of the browser and ending up in the bottom right is not exactly a good user experience. So there's ways to assist and be able to basically put in whether you're using custom coding or modifying your user experience to kind of assist users down through that journey as they want to operate a website without a keyboard. And keep in mind, if we're talking about kind of difficulties on these things, again, I'll go back to Paul's house analogy on this.
Mm-hmm.
So, say for example, you have a blueprint, and you want to put a building up, and you put it up, and it's 3 stories high.
Right.
And then the building inspector comes along and says, "Okay, what is your accessibility to the 3rd floor of this building?" And you didn't put an elevator in.
Right.
So that's essentially similar to designing a website or building a website without putting any accessibility features in it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you plan for that up front, it is a much easier process than going back in and installing an elevator in a brand new
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So really and it's not just, being able to use, tab or your keyboard to navigate through the website. For really all these accessibility features, it's the upfront kind of planning when you're first looking at doing a web initiative, rather than kind of going back and trying to apply these practices to a website that already exists.
Thank you. Yeah. The next principle is understandable. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. So you must make text readable and understandable, make content appear and operate in predictable ways, and help users avoid and correct mistakes. And the 4th principle is R, robust. Content must be robust enough so it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. In other words, don't use tags or code that only certain browsers understand. Maximum compatibility with current and future user tools. For each of the WCAG 2.0 principles, there are guidance levels, A, AA, AAA. So similar types of accessibility features are addressed in each, with AA having more than A, and AAA having the most criteria to meet. Andrew, how many websites out there achieve AAA accessibility?
I will actually go on record by saying just about 0. If you could find one out there, I would be surprised. So when you look at levels of the WCAG compliance, there's, as you just mentioned, there's the 3 levels. Mm-hmm. So A is, you can kind of translate it to A is must have, mm-hmm. AA is should have, and AAA is it's nice to have.
Sure, yeah.
Or it's, you're providing a better accessibility, but if you read through all those standards, you'll quickly realize that some of them in there are just it's a large undertaking.
Yeah,
to be able to provide.
I can think of one. I think video. If you're showing live video, you have to have transcript for a live video, and that'd be nearly impossible to do.
A lot of it has to do with media and audio, or video and audio, providing transcripts, making sure that people get the same context and information out of there without being able to either hear or see what's being presented to them. And if you look at that in reverse, a lot of the single A items are quick hitters, mm-hmm. Where you can just kind of go through and it might take a developer an hour or 2 to cross a couple of those off the list.
Yeah.
So it really goes in both directions.
Nice. So businesses do not have to comply with all listed criteria to meet conformance, only those that apply to their website and audience. For instance, if you don't have video on your website, you don't have to worry about captioning videos.
Right.
So just a quick look then at some of the most important WCAG 2.0 guideline level AA. The main items are captions provided for audio content, transcripts provided for video content, content headings and labels are descriptive of topic or purpose, the ability for the user to resize text up to 200%, and navigation features are consistent. Stepping back to the content headings, Andrew, could you tell us what it means for content headings and labels to be descriptive of topic and purpose?
Yeah, so it's not just the content headings and labels.
Mm-hmm.
If you take into account, sure, the headings and labels, but also, whether it's error messages and alt tags, it's really just, aside from any compliance, it's best practices.
Yes, yeah.
To provide, contextual, on-point messaging to the user as they're navigating throughout the website. So whether it's an alt tag that you call out some colors in there and describe the picture instead of just saying picture of a barn. It's, red barn in the, grassy meadow next to a tree. Something where it actually provides meaning to the user, where the text surrounding that can also complement it as well. So same things with headings and labels, where it's meant to be contextual. It needs to be descriptive for the messaging that you're trying to provide to the user, and it needs to be relevant for where the user is throughout navigating the website.
Nice, thank you. You had mentioned forms there, and I'm thinking of, say, submitting a form and filling in your email address, and you just get back the message just error. It doesn't tell you what the error is. It has to be more descriptive. It says, invalid format for email entered.
I still will very frequently run in, just everyday use of, the internet or any, no particular website, where you'll fill out a form or maybe some sort of wizard, and it just it provides non-contextual messages where you hit the submit button and you get the error message right below the submit button. There was an error on the form
somewhere. Yeah,
it's like, oh, great, thanks.
Another one I'd like to touch on there, Andrew. Could you explain what it means for navigation features to be consistent?
Yeah, that one's relatively straightforward. Where take for example an average website or a website that's following kind of the today's designs, where maybe you have a high level navigation or a mega menu up at the top. You have a left hand navigation going down the side, and then you have some footer links down at the bottom. So if that's on a home page or a landing page, when you go to maybe a detail page, you kind of continue clicking through to the website. Well, I wouldn't expect the menu to all of a sudden be on the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
And then the menu that was on the left-hand side is now on the right-hand side, and because we put calls to actions on the left-hand side, or maybe the footer links change based on where I am within the page. So it's really to be able to provide a consistent experience so that not only the people browsing the website don't get confused when they're doing it, but also for accessibility tools as well. Whether it's using screen readers or other adaptive technologies, those technologies are expecting not only kind of programmatic cues within these areas, but just the general fact that it's consistent.
Just a couple more slides. We do have some questions coming through that we'll get to. I just want to finish on a couple of thoughts here. Accessibility overlaps with other best practices such as mobile web design, device independence, multimodal interaction, usability design for older users, and search engine optimization, SEO. And this is from the W3C. Thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, accessibility is really just one piece of the overall solid user experience that someone should expect when they come to a website. Whether it's actually allowing screen readers to be able to traverse the website in a easy to use manner, or if it's simply just providing general error messaging and a responsive web design that fits multiple screen sizes. You're really just, this is one tool in your toolbox of being able to provide that kind of polished website and that kind of fluid experience to people.
Just close on some best practices for accessible content, and I think you'll see it's this accessibility is a best practice. These are things that should be done on your website. Do not rely on color as a navigational tool or as the sole way to differentiate items. Andrew, could you clarify this? There are color ratios you should strive for, right?
I mean, probably the best example of that is simply for the fact that there's a large percentage of people out there that are somewhat colorblind.
Right. So
if you have any sort of visual cues on your website that relies on color, that might not be the same color to everybody.
Right.
So I mean, that kind of just goes back to general best practices as well.
Yep. Nice. Images should include alt text in the markup code. Complex images should have more extensive descriptions near the image. You touched on this. It's not just a barn. It's a red barn in the field, or functionality should be accessible through mouse and keyboard and be tagged to work with voice control systems. Provide transcripts for podcasts, and if you have video on your site, you must provide visual access to the audio information through in-sync captioning. And sites should have a skip navigation feature. I wasn't too sure what this feature was. Andrew, could you clarify?
Yep. So if you go to, there's a lot of websites out there where they might have something called a mega menu.
Okay, yeah.
And in these mega menus, you have anywhere between 50 to
Sure, yeah.
potentially hundreds of links. I mean, I've seen some pretty nasty ones out there. And then you might put a search box in your menu so that when it goes down to responsive, that's included within the mobile drop down as well. So I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that people will put at the top of the webpage. I mean, you go to your favorite news website.
Yeah, sure.
And it's almost a nightmare getting to actually what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So really the skip navigation is not necessarily navigation per se. It really is just being able to have somebody go directly to the content that pertains to them on that site.
Okay, interesting. So we'll move on now to the Q&A. So hopefully we've sufficiently covered the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act, how it'll apply to websites, and the legal necessity really for ensuring your site is ADA compliant. We received a few questions prior to the presentation, but I do want to tackle one that just came through. Perhaps, Andrew, if anyone could answer this one, it would be yourself. But we have a question regarding ADA and PDFs, PDF accessibility. Any thoughts there or any experience working with PDFs on websites?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple different thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm.
So the main one is, I think the general trend and best practices is to start to get away from putting PDFs on the internet. If that is not something that is easily done, I fully understand that there's lots of businesses out there that have hundreds and even thousands of PDFs accessible on their website, whether it's knowledge base or product information or what have you. If that is the case, there is ways and there is guidelines within WCAG that references specifically PDF files.
Okay.
A lot of it is similar to what you would find for the web guidelines. There's not quite as much for PDFs as there is for web guidelines. You can still put images in PDFs. You can still use color choices. I mean, a lot of a PDF is similar to what you could visually present onto a website.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously less video.
Yeah.
But in those cases, tables, things like that, there is guidelines listed out by the W3C that cover PDFs. But again, I would kind of go back and stress that it is much easier to maintain ADA compliance on a website than it is in pre-printed PDF documents.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
If I may just jump in too, I mean, one of the things you always need to think about is, for instance, say you have gone through the remediation and your website is considered to be compliant to the AA standards, and Andrew, you've hired somebody like Andrew and you've gone through this. The big problem some companies may have is then they decide they're going to take the website over again and they're going to start adding things to the website that make it non-compliant. And probably one of the biggest problems is, in fact, loading PDFs onto the website after you've gone through the remediation process. And again, a lot of people use the PDFs to provide announcements. Like, in other words, some senior executive just got promoted or just was elected to some position in some municipality, or they're on some board somewhere and they think it makes sense to just, put the news release on as a PDF onto the website. That could cause issues. So what sometimes you can do is make it part of the website instead of a PDF, or if you'd like, provide a link to a site that is not yours so that you are no longer responsible for the site that somebody's now going to go to read this press release, if in fact that's what you'd like to do. And then make sure on your website you have language that indicates that you're not responsible for a link that you provided on your website to a site that may in fact not be compliant.
Thinking too, if you're going to put it on the site, say instead of posting that PDF of that blog post, the PDF of a press release, perhaps you write a blog post that's on your website. Now you have the benefit of having that content being searchable, being indexed by websites. So there are benefits for, if at all possible, moving away from PDFs and having that content. Another question here regarding resizing text. Does the browser's ability to do that count, or does there have to be a mechanism that changes font size via the CSS?
Technically, it does not count.
It does not.
And the only reason for that is they don't know what browser you're using.
Sure. Yeah.
So the way the internet works is you hit a server, and basically it delivers rendered HTML into, for instance, Chrome, but it doesn't necessarily know that you're using Chrome. So it is still up to the user to provide a mechanism on their website to be able to do that.
You do.
Whoever asked that question, I agree with you that in some cases we should be able to utilize browser technologies to be able to assist with some of this, but at the same time I understand the point that potentially not everybody accessing the internet or this your particular website has those capabilities.
Yes, makes sense. Another question here. Is there any testing services available so you can experience your website from the perspective of a person with a disability?
Yeah, they have lots of, there's lots of different actual, physical tools as well as software packages out there. Some of them might be, simulating whether you're colorblind, or actually simulating, being able to hook up a screen reader, whether it's the software that you would plug into your browser, to be able to do that. So that, there's definitely, whether it's physical or software, there is, QA lab based, tools to be able to use that. And then in terms of actually checking whether a website is compliant or not, there is software packages out there. We can list a couple, but at the same time, really what those are checking for is programmatic ways of accomplishing certain tasks.
Yeah.
So, it's very easy for a script to go in there and say, okay, everything in here that is an A tag also has, an alt tag, or an image tag also has an alt tag. But at the same time, there's a lot of information, or a lot of there's a lot of criteria. Sorry, couldn't think of the word within WCAG that can't be tested.
Right. So it could tell that there's an alt tag there, but it couldn't tell if that alt tag is properly descriptive.
Exactly. So really, to get a full audit on making sure something is WCAG compliant, it's still to this day, believe me, I've looked, requires human intervention.
Okay, so there are some tools that could probably, kind of get you started, but human intervention is necessary.
Yeah, you can probably get about 50% of the way there just using tools.
I do have a couple of other questions that I did want to. We've talked a lot about alt text, so I think we've kind of answered that question. I would say one question I'd like to ask Andrew is, if I left the webinar today, what could I do to take the first steps towards making sure my site was ADA compliant?
Yeah, I'd go ahead and use probably one of the free tools on the internet, just to get a quick kind of 30,000 foot overview of what I'm looking at and kind of how off my website might be. You're not going to find a perfect one out there, and you're going to find, each one you use will probably give you slightly different results. But it will give you a good general overview of kind of how big the problem is that you're looking at. And then based on that, I'd think about your audience a little bit. I would look at, traffic patterns coming to your website. Some of the more popular pages within the website. I'll be testing those before the
kind of
pages.
Attacking the big ones.
So I would take a kind of a tactical approach to it at first. Identify the most popular areas of your website. Run some of the tests that you can just kind of go into Google and type in WCAG. Compliance, there's a couple like the WebAIM and W3. I think if you go to w3.org, there's a listing of tools there as well. And just to kind of get a grasp on what you're looking at, and then at that point, whether you involve a third party or look at how to solve these issues.
Nice. Paul, you touched on this earlier. Another question I just wanted to put out there is that many websites, when they launch, so you've created this ADA compliant website, but they end up with violations after, kind of the marketing team starts pushing out new content. Maybe they're not putting alt tags in there as they publish those images. Any recommendations either of you have to maintain compliance after launch?
Well, I think each entity needs to probably have someone who's responsible for maintaining the website's compliance. In other words, some sort of compliance review, some sort of audit review on some kind of semi-annual or annual basis would be necessary, especially again if you are using your website to keep current, to push a lot of content. And then obviously to make sure people who are in fact doing that are aware of the need to be compliant.
Sure, yeah, so probably some training.
So some training would probably be a really good idea to make sure that people understand the importance.
Mm-hmm. And I can think too of fully taking advantage of kind of the built-in workflows within a CMS too. I know if I'm pushing content, you can go to an approver, so then there's just kind of that second set of eyes.
Yeah, and not only that, there's also actually automation tools within the CMS, a lot of the CMSs themselves, where a content editor can kind of click a button and get a good general overview of, especially the items that are, can be identified using code or scripting.
Last thing I just want to touch on, unless any more questions come through, but at SilverTech here, we've worked with hospitals, banks, and credit unions, and universities that have required level AA WCAG compliance on the websites. Are there really any differences in ADA compliance for those in healthcare, financial services, or higher education? Are we working with the same things?
I think it's relatively... It's pretty much the same. The standards are the standards.
Yep.
We certainly will see different types of content or different things that need to be addressed within those respective verticals. But the actual actual end result is you still have to have a compliant website.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be driven by content. Just off the top of my head, bank. What do you do with a bank? Well, you're transacting banking functions. You might be looking for information. A hospital, the same thing. You might be paying a bill. You're looking for information. But a university, you might be actually doing online learning. So there may be a different requirement because of the audience of each one of those verticals.
Excellent. Well, I think we have touched on everything, and I think we have addressed all of the questions that have come through. Do want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's a great presentation. Thank you, Paul, for sharing your insight on the legal side. Thank you, Andrew, for the engineering development side. I will follow up today's presentation with a link to an on-demand video. You can watch this. I will also get you access to the slides, and I will do my best to kind of sum up some of the answers and perhaps provide some links to some of those free resources that we mentioned. So you can expect that early next week. So again, Ian from SilverTech. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.